Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, Yatogami has posed a low effort, as they say, Parley, at the tail end of 2022. Consider the image below and give me your thoughts. A breakdown of the dialogue will follow under spoiler tags. For bonus points, read the dialogue with your best Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse impressions, respectively. Sure, I'll try. The Donald Duck one, I don't think I'm going to be able to do something convincing, but Mickey we can probably do, I would imagine. So to be clear, the parlay is we're going to read that in appropriate voices, or I'm going to attempt them and see if it's bearable, and then I'll respond. Then Yatogami has broken down the propositions as a philosophical discussion below, and we're going to go through them one by one. Cool. So a little discussion of this meme that you may or may not have seen around. I've certainly been exposed to this before. Okay, Donald Duck. Can we do Donald Duck? Everything that we... Oh, I don't know. It's more nasal. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this one, but I'll try a few more times. Everything... I don't know why I'm trying to get in my nose. Everything that we know... I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. I'll try again for Mickey, but I would say I lose the bonus points on that one. Or to put it a different way, I don't think you want to give me bonus points for that. Everything that we know and love is reducible to the absurd acts of chemicals, and is therefore no intrinsic value in this material universe. Okay, and then Mickey we could probably do. Hypocrite that you are, for you trust the chemicals in your brain to tell you that they are chemicals. All knowledge is ultimately based on that which we cannot prove. Will you fight? Or will you perish like a dog? Like 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10. Bearable. Bonus points awarded, I'm sure. Pretty straightforward, in my opinion. Donald here seems to be upset that there doesn't really seem to be any further source of value in the universe. It's not as if we have some greater thing, because everything comes from chemicals interacting. There's nothing beyond. Or really what's true, as Mickey will later point out, is that we don't know that there's anything beyond. As far as we're aware, it's just a bunch of chemicals interacting. So who cares, basically? Now, I think the confusion here, as Mickey kind of points out, is that Donald is acting as though us not knowing that there is something beyond that is the same as there not being something beyond that. In other words, not being able to prove that there's another source of value beyond the absurd acts of chemicals is the same as if we knew there wasn't anything beyond the absurd acts of chemicals, but that isn't the same. Mickey explains, you trust the chemicals in your brain to tell you that they are chemicals. Like, why? All knowledge is ultimately based on that which we cannot prove. So we don't know. Will you choose to just accept that, or will you maybe keep an open mind for something greater? That's how I interpret it. Something that I think is critical to bring up before we move on is that, and I say it's critical because this is what mattered to me when I was younger and was bothered by this kind of thing, is that it doesn't necessarily matter that there isn't any other source of intrinsic value. What would that even be? The simple fact that things are just a bunch of chemicals interacting is not necessarily of note or concern, in my opinion. That's not necessarily bad. I don't think there's a reason that has to be so negative. I feel that you could resolve it by saying, well, we don't know, there's no other source of value. You shouldn't act like us not knowing is the same as there being nothing else. Sure. And I agree that takes a bit of the magic out of living. We don't know. That is an important and exciting detail. Sure. Don't simplify that out. Yeah, sure. At the same time, why does it even matter if there is some other source? Again, what would that even be? What would a source of intrinsic value be? There's some godlike being, I guess, that just kind of asserts or decides that there is something else worthwhile. Why? Who cares? Why would that matter? I think I get the gist, which is that most of society does care. Most people feel that there is kind of a goal or purpose, and it is the one prescribed by their environment, I guess, the social contract, or whatever. But those things aren't valuable either. Why would they be? They're just things that other people made up. People who value them are, to some degree or another, ultimately unaware of just how much it is the same as them caring about something they made up. The person who decided that it's valuable to, have a successful career is essentially you, is essentially the person who cares about this thing. But that person wouldn't care if it was their own goal. They think it's valuable because it's a goal presented from the outside. Society agrees that that's a valuable thing. And that's why most people care about that. But they seem not to realize that that really isn't any different than if they decided that was a worthwhile thing. If they decided something was worthwhile, they wouldn't hold that in high regard. But the values that they think are important are not of any higher standing than that. Nothing is of any higher standing than that. Nothing is of any standing. And so in my mind, that wouldn't change even if there was any other source of value, anything that could provide any value. It doesn't matter what sources of value there are or aren't. None of them matter. No, they can't matter. There is no such thing as things mattering. What would that even be? You know what I mean? That would just be someone stronger, someone that can assert their will on reality more than you, saying that something is important. That's just bullying. That doesn't matter. Who cares? So anyway, my take is that this is not a problem. I think that Mickey's solution to the problem is an important understanding, something important to keep in mind. We don't know what there is or isn't. But it also wouldn't matter even if we did know. It's exciting because we don't know. If we did know that whatever it is that we found out could not possibly alleviate any existential dread for a logical reason, in my opinion. I think some people would feel better on the surface, but it would solve no philosophical conundrum, in my opinion. There can't be some thing revealed to us, some presence revealed to us that just magically does matter in some way beyond anything else mattering or not mattering. Is that followable? So you understand, hopefully, the conundrum between Donald and then Mickey's solution, and also my own opinion, which is that there actually is no problem as per se, or a solution is impossible, but Mickey's point is still useful to keep in mind. It's certainly not a bad thing to think, but it doesn't alleviate any apparent existential dread, I guess. Okay, so now we're meant to go through one by one, and Yatogami has kind of broken down each of the propositions, so we can dig into it a little bit more. If you are feeling a little lost, or you want to develop your own opinion about this, which I would highly recommend since you were stuck in this world one way or another, then hopefully this will help. Cool, fun. It's pretty straightforward parlay, but it sounds cool. Proposition 1, Yatogami says, everything that we know and love is reducible to the absurd acts of chemicals. I'll reveal the spoilers. Donald Duck seems to have been getting into the existentialism juice. He realizes that existence is a product of experience, and that experience is a product of perception, the process of becoming aware through thoughts and senses. Perception, in turn, is made possible at the biological level through exchanges of neurotransmitters, chemical messengers between nerve cells, which Donald terms as absurd acts of chemicals. As chemicals, neurotransmitters do not have consciousness, will, intentionality, etc., as we understand it, or understand it, as the case may be. In any case, for something as complex as consciousness to arise from the activity of unconscious things could be fairly described as absurd, I think. I will grant Donald this. Indeed, no disagreement here. I feel it is relevant to point out that we already, Mickey's solution, or kind of counterpoint, has come into play. We don't know that nothing arises from those things. It is reasonable to be skeptical that anything does, yes. That there is anything distinct that we'd call consciousness, there doesn't seem to be a reason to think that there would be. But I feel it is already important to keep the foot in the door that we don't know there isn't, we just don't have a good reason to think there is. But indeed, it's hard to argue that it wouldn't be at least strange or surprising to find out that there was some emergent property from all these neurotransmitters fiddling around. Now, there are other places in our lives where it does seem like something is arising from more than the sum of its parts. Things like ants and bees interacting in groups appear to display a sort of group intelligence. AI, artificial intelligence development, often includes programmers not really being able to tell you exactly how what they've made works because they made processes that made the thing. They didn't make the thing directly. YouTube, for example, can't just tell you why the YouTube algorithm does exactly what it does. That's not particularly remarkable, in my opinion. It could be tellable, like it could be possible to tell someone, and we just lack the comprehension to explain it. Or maybe, unbeknownst to us, it actually is untellable. There is something arising from beyond the sum of its parts. There's some mysterious emergent property. We don't know which is which. Indeed, it does seem strange that there would be something truly beyond the sum of its parts. It's probably just that we can't explain it, and that doesn't seem remarkable. But it's important to keep in mind that we don't know for sure. Anyway, sure, I don't think this is the case only with consciousness. And again, as I said in my bit at the beginning, I actually don't think this is a problem at all. But I don't disagree with this point so far. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there is anything beyond absurd acts of chemicals. I just think the word absurd is overdramatic in this context. Like, sure, things are all just acts of chemicals. Big whoop. Like, what else is new? The sun rose today. Moving on. There is therefore no intrinsic value in this material universe, Proposition 2. Revealing the spoilers. Yatogami says existence is a product of experience, and experience is a product of perception. One's experience does not extend before one's birth, nor will it extend after one's death. For that matter, one can only know one's own perception. With all this in mind, can it really be known that there are other consciousnesses besides one's own? Or must one simply give others the benefit of the doubt, knowing that the same absurd acts of chemicals are going on in the heads of similar beings? Perhaps that is the true absurdity, that even the consciousness that is allowed to question itself cannot know if it is alone. For what it's worth, I agree with this viewpoint. More on this later. I also don't have much to say. I think that it's a great point that Yatogami makes, that one of the critical anxieties of being a human is that we don't really know what's going on in each other's heads. An important point of maturity for us folks as we grow up is to realize that we will need to take a leap of faith. We cannot ever be completely secure. Personally, I think that a lot of people take this a bit too far and deny other people any security because they feel it's immature or unhealthy to want any security, when the thing that's a problem is trying to get total security simply because it doesn't exist. Like, it's not real. You can never get it. If you're given something that feels like it, it's false. Like that, you cannot have that because you can never really know what's going on the other side. But a lot of people respond to that by acting like you should be okay having no security, which is poppycock. Like, why not? That's not bad. That's like saying because you can never have total financial stability, you shouldn't be given any financial stability. Why? That no, that doesn't make sense. Or you're going to have unstable foods in your diet, so don't even bother having any form of stable diet in any part of your life. Why? Like that's an unnecessary adaptation. There's no need for things to be all the way. Things can be nice from time to time, and then you can grow and be in like the real world or whatever other times. You don't need to be treated with the brutality of existence 100% of the time to be made mature and acclimated to it. You don't need to train at something or be exposed to something 100% of the time to become a person who can deal with it. Of course you don't. That's ridiculous. But people often act like that's a thing that you need to do. If you don't know what I mean, think about this and you will notice people doing it in your daily life. Almost everybody I've ever met has a very toxic relationship with this idea of like being allowed to be You might even say it in a more negative way, like coddled or comforted or codependent would be an extreme way to say it. It is not necessary to completely eliminate these things from your life everywhere. It's not even that possible. Just like it's not possible to have total stability or reassurance or anything anywhere in your life. Those things just don't exist. But it isn't a problem to have a little bit of each one. That being said, yeah, I do think that the conundrum stands. We can't really know what's going on the other side, and so there is an inherent anxiety there. We can't really know anything. We have to accept that human relationships will involve trying to trust other people when we can't possibly ever have a completely valid reason to trust someone. We can just have a partially valid reason to trust someone, and that's fine. Trying to go all the way one way or another is foolish. Don't do it. It won't work. Trying to blindly trust people is bad, and giving up on trust because you can't have total trust is also immature. You have to be willing to settle for some but not all. That's fine. It's just a matter of growing up. And indeed, I do think on a broader scale, this is the problem with existence. We can't really be sure of anything, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and act like relative sureness is somehow not valuable just because we can never get more of it. Like, so what? Deal with it. It's perfectly okay to work with what you have. If something is a better option than other options, it's not bad just because you can't think of anything even better than that. Just because something's competition is bad doesn't mean the best of a bunch of options is magically not good just because the competition is bad. It might not be great, but it's still the best thing you can choose to do. So, yeah, I personally, I don't think that this has significant implications. I don't think that it's really a problem, but indeed, a lot of anxiety comes from the human concern about what exactly is going on in other people's heads. What is your partner, for example, thinking about while you're sitting there in silence? What's going on in their head? And indeed, I don't think it's wrong to wonder or even ask from time to time, provided that you accept that it isn't really possible to just always know. Wanting to know, even asking about it, trying to know more, isn't bad as long as it isn't out of control. I think I've gone on this point for long enough. It just really interests me. Proposition 3. You trust the chemicals in your brain to tell you that they are chemicals. And indeed, Mickey challenges Donald. Yatogami says, calling him a hypocrite. It seems to me that he's saying, you started with the right premise, but drew the wrong conclusion. Or perhaps you were asking the wrong question. Sure, I suppose. I didn't interpret it this way myself as much as that Donald is saying, well, we don't know anything. And Mickey is saying, well, we don't even know that we don't know anything. I thought it was that simple, but you could word it this way, that it's a mistaken premise, or we got derailed somewhere. Just because everything is the absurd interactions of chemicals doesn't mean there's just nothing in the entire universe. The hypocrisy point, yeah, you could focus on that a little more and think of it as, is Mickey saying, how arrogant of you to assume that your lack of perspective means something about the broader universe? I didn't word it that way myself. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's keep going. Proposition 4. All knowledge is ultimately based on what we cannot prove. Yatogami says, here we finally return to my brand with a brush against the topic of knowledge. And it seems Mickey's not concerned with grounding knowledge in proof. Notably, he's not denying Donald's claims about the nature of existence, which indicates to me that he accepts and holds that view for himself, that existence depends on experience and subsequently perception, but that any further theorizing is not relevant. Yes, I would agree with that interpretation. Mickey isn't saying that it's wrong that existence is unclear. Mickey is just saying that because it's unclear, you can't just be so certain about it. You can't just turn around and be so certain about things. This is the part of the parlay where we should probably acknowledge that obviously Yatogami and I are poking a bit of fun. I doubt that this was written with this level of academic rigor in mind, and this is no high level of academic rigor. But it is relatively consistent. Like, I believe this is a rather coherent philosophical argument. It is not a meme in terms of content. Like, this is a perfectly valid and understandable psychological perspective. I just wonder whether it was written with the intention that it be this analyzed. We're having a bit of fun. It doesn't really matter, but I just think that's interesting to note. Mickey's ultimatum. Finally, Yatogami says, will you fight or will you perish like a dog? I'd like to give Mickey the benefit of the doubt here and say he's dramatizing his words for Donald's sake. Tough love might be one way to put it, or scaring him straight. In my mind, Mickey's words translate to, will you live on, struggling with the knowledge that you cannot know more than your own experience, but maintaining your independence as a rational being? Or will you close your mind to further thoughts and live as an animal, giving up your faculty of reason in order to avoid the pain of existential dread? Needless to say, I think it's better to live as a confused but rational being searching for meaning than to live as a being incapable of reason at all. Certainly, it is very childish to discard reasoning simply because you've noticed that it isn't entirely possible. For goodness sakes, when have we ever completely succeeded at anything? I often feel that when people are bothered by this type of thing, they seem not to have noticed that nothing in their human experience has yet been different from that, right? It's not like we normally have such total victories, such complete surety. Looking back at one's childhood, you'll notice how completely flawed and mistaken most things were. But it's fine. Like things are just like this. It's normal. It's just looking around should reassure one that it's not that weird to just be kind of unsure of things. That happens all the time. Another way to put it that maybe isn't as much tough love is like, give yourself more credit, you human. It's curse words, human. You've been unsure about things this whole time and you've been doing great. Maybe you just didn't notice how often you were unsure of things and it seemed to be completely fine. Is it really so bad to just be to realize that unsureness was a property of your experience overall and not just something circumstantial? I guess it does come as a shock initially, doesn't it? This idea that, yeah, you may have moment to moment in life made decisions in your everyday life thinking, yeah, like I'm not sure which brand of potatoes to buy, but I could think about it and find out the answer at some point when actually you kind of couldn't. And then later you sit down and think, wait a minute, I can't really be sure of anything. It's like, yeah, you were unsure of things all along. I think maybe it's just that people kind of assume that they could have become sure of the thing if only they thought about it a lot more, for example. I always find it very reassuring to look at, for example, I've been doing YouTube stuff for a long time now, at least. And so I've come to understand that nobody really understands what is happening with their videos. The most successful people on the platform, the most consistent people on the platform, still feel significant doubt about the thing they're doing. They just aren't unclear about what they are going to respond to that with, right? They have a system for how they run their business. That system just doesn't come from being sure it's a good system. They have a clear system. They've decided something. They can do that quite decisively, sure. But it's not because they know for sure that's a good decision. It's just because they know for sure that they have to make a decision. A really good example would be the CGP Grey has a couple videos directly about this topic. I really admire how he weaves that in every so often to his videos. But there's lots of other creators. Veritasium has done some videos on virality. There's a whole category of channels. I don't really like Veritasium's channel that much. No offense, it's just not for me. That are, I would describe them as viral fishing channels. They're sort of attempting to get a video they're trying to make videos that purposefully that will be a viral video. And over the course of the year, the hope is that they will catch a big fish one of the videos of the year. That video will do so much better than the other videos that it almost pays for the whole year as long as they get it. Very much like you could relate it a little bit to farming, for example. You're not going to make money for a lot of the year, but when you harvest, that's going to carry it over to the rest of the year. And it's not out of the ordinary to take that relative leap of faith. After all, the seasons do happen. Harvest occurs. Things will bloom up. It would be very childish indeed to suggest that it's not a good prospect just because you're not making money now, or it doesn't look like anything's happening after a week. For goodness sakes, it's farming. You need to wait a year for them to come up, I'm very heavily oversimplifying farming, but you get the point. Same thing. Viral videos happen. Just because it's unreliable doesn't really matter. Everything is unreliable. What matters is how relatively reliable it is. And it turns out it's actually relatively reliable. Those channels tend to do pretty well, especially because if you get some early success, of course, you can kind of buffer for future success. And it gives you more data as well. It begins to give you a map of the landscape of exactly what types of things do well. If you do it scientifically and keep track of which ones do well and which ones don't, you begin to build a model of what kinds of things would and wouldn't make something go viral or whatever. I'll give you another example from my own experience. I've been using Midjourney quite a bit, an image generation AI. If you're familiar with DALL-E, this is similar. Midjourney has you put in prompts and then it generates an image. Now, it can be a little bit difficult to understand at first exactly what will give you an image you want. Some types of prompts mysteriously generate significantly better results than others at first, but as you think about it more, you begin to understand, well, Midjourney works from a database of images. For example, I did a lot of prompts about related to Christmas for the holidays because I was trying to explain to my folks what this thing does. They didn't really understand. And so I did a lot of Christmas related prompts, and imagery around Christmas is pretty coherent. It's not that hard for an artificial intelligence or a human to say what correlates with a Christmassy image, what kinds of things, what colors, for example, what shapes, a Christmas tree, the framing of a window, like a cozy living room or something where the tree is, stuff like that. Snow, red and green, etc., right? Like you can easily think of lots of things that correlate. And so, yeah, it doesn't let you reliably generate an image that is what you were looking for. But that doesn't matter because nothing lets you reliably do anything completely reliably. How reliable is it? To me, that is sort of the only point. I feel like people get caught up in this idea that they kind of need to know something. And I feel tempted here to bring up the critical point that it isn't necessarily because people themselves care. I've said some condescending things in this parlay. I've said things like it's kind of childish to think that or whatever. And I'm not necessarily mocking people who are in that situation. People are children at a point in their lives. And after all, trying to grow and become better is the best we can do since we can't have it all perfect. Furthermore, it's important to note that a lot of people who want something a little more perfect don't necessarily want it for themselves, or not directly anyway. A lot of the time when people want the best build in a game, for example, it's not necessarily because they themselves care about that. It's because they feel like they can't share it with other people unless they have a seemingly bulletproof defense for why that thing should be that way. Otherwise, they know what people are going to do. They're going to poke it full of holes. They're going to criticize it. That's going to make them self-conscious. Even if they're not aware that they'll feel that way, even if they don't think of that as bothering them, it's a value that gets ingrained in a person by living in a society where something that doesn't appear to have airtight reasoning will be poked full of holes immediately by thousands of random strangers on the internet. So just because somebody wants something to seem perfect or like the only right answer or oversimplified is how I think of it. It's not. There is no right answer. That's not a thing. It might not be because they want a right answer. They might want what a right answer correlates with, which is a relative lack of social anxiety, right? Not necessarily perfection. They may or may not care about that. They might just want people to screw off, basically. I'm definitely guilty of this. Anytime that I reach for this is the best thing or this is the way to go or whatever, I don't care at all. I just want people to leave me alone about that. And I've tried to learn to just not care about even that because it doesn't really matter. But it is annoying. It's annoying, sure. You can kind of cut off those arguments ahead of time. I just think it's interesting to consider how it's not so simple why people seek perfection or total sureness about something. It isn't necessarily always something like this situation where Donald is feeling anxious about the nature of existence. It may be anxiousness about how other people will treat your seemingly wobbly claim. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just useful to keep in mind. I don't think I have anything else to say. I know it might have seemed off topic at some points. I just feel like the topic is about existential dread. I feel it weaves into every part of our existence, and it is important, if you're going to address it, to have a way of addressing it that understands the whole, not just the high level problem, but also the situation on the ground. What does it mean that people want surety even though there isn't any? Where are all of the ways that that manifests in our lives, and what do we do about them when they come up? I hope I've given at least my responses to them so you can vehemently disagree and do it your own way, or some such similar response. This was fun. This was cool. Interesting little ride.